Pack
Hikaru
your
Nakamura.
bags.
6-2. And you know what Hikaru's face said? It was the double question mark. You saw it in his eyes. He's like, is this really Magnus Carlsen, or is this an imposter? This isn't Among Us. You got to play chess. And right now, Magnus Carlsen is down 6-2, Danya. Can you believe it?
I cannot believe it. He's under Magnus's skin. He is filled with confidence. He believes right now, does Hikaru Nakamura, that he can win every single game in this match. It's like what basketball players talk about when they start hitting shots. The net is as wide as the ocean right now for Hikaru Nakamura, and that is a terrifying prospect for Magnus. He's down by 4. This is the final game of the 5-minute portion, and once again, Carlsen going for a very tactical opening. And look at Hikaru. He meets him at the top. He says, you want a Najdorf? I'll give you a Najdorf. I'll give you the sharpest Najdorf because I want to win this game and get to a 5-point lead.
I just am in disbelief. Bishop D7 covering the C6 square.
So I'm not familiar with that move. And neither is Hikaru by the looks of it. we did it again.
Why does this always happen to us?
It only took 87 minutes.
Well, we've been here the whole time. The players giving it their all, and Hikaru, he's giving it that stink eye. He's like, this smells fishy. I don't believe in it, but it actually looks quite solid for black because the one downside of playing Bishop D7 is your pawn on B7 is a bit loose. E5 comes to mind for white, just trying to get at that pawn on B7. But there might even be like a knight C6 follow-up in that position. So you have to be very careful before you push E5.
That is a worthy line to show, but we're not going to show it because they are past that. Hikaru decides to continue his development. It is very typical in this line to castle queenside. And is it time for E5? No, another developing move. And the eval bar, not a fan. Is that bishop going to be vulnerable after black puts something on the C file?
Yeah, queen c7. That's a standard Sicilian move. The bishop, that kind of sews in bishop on c4. Not great here. It's vulnerable to attack. The knight can hop to a5 later. So I feel like the black position is extremely solid at this point. And so Magnus has everything he could have hoped for out of the opening.
This was a very astute choice. Bishop d7 taking Hikaru out of his comfort zone. I assume he'll meet queen c7 with the Sozin-esque bishop b3, where the bishop is very safely protected, but I suppose the problem in that position isn't so much the bishop as the attack that black can unroll on the queen side of the move like b5.
It can get really scary. So I like the move queen c7, just getting off the d file. I just don't like the look of e5 with some kind of like knight takes e6 at some point. It just looks scary to my eyes. I know it doesn't work, Danya, right? You get too many pieces, but I just don't like the queen staring down the line towards an enemy rook.
No, you're absolutely right. I don't either. And Magnus doesn't like the placement of the bishop on g5, which can now drop back to h4. But then you have to start reckoning with tactics based on the fact that the bishop will no longer be defended. Of course, the immediate knight e4 in that position fails because you take the bishop first. But you got to watch out for that. That's just another thing for Hikaru to keep track of. And the queen lands on b6.
And Hikaru does not want to take on c6. That will improve the light square bishop. The light square bishop on d7 and the knight on c6 fighting for the same square. I see an argument for knight to b3 here, just trying to play on the queen side, but bishop f2. Great awareness from Hikaru. He improves the location of his bishop because you didn't want to take on f6 anyway, and he defends the center.
And perhaps forcing the bishop on f2 actually did more harm than good because now the knight, it's a little bit more solid. You can consider taking and playing e5. There's always this prospect of bishop g4 pinning the queen, but that involves making too many weaknesses. And Magnus sidesteps the tension with another typical Sicilian move. We see this in the dragon and the Najdorf very frequently. Knight a5.
And the big question is when or if black will castle, right? Castle kingside, you may be walking into an attack because you created a hook. The pawn on h6 wishes it could push back to h7 so that when g4, g5 happens, the king isn't open. So he castles queenside, and it was an objectively terrible choice, apparently, but I think practically it could be hard to punish.
Yeah, but look at the c-file, Robert. Look at the c-file. He's going to get a rook to c1, and he's going to harass the queen, forcing it to the side of the board. This just looks terrible.
What you need for black is to trade that dark square bishop away. Because if you could get your queen to e5, that would be excellent for black. But you can't get over there. So this is a big problem. This is a really, really big problem. Rook c1 already threatens discoveries like knight to d or b5. The queen will have to go on a journey. So I'm not liking this for Magnus, excuse me. I feel like castling queenside was just too wild.
It looks so flimsy. It looks like he's already barely hanging on. I don't like to show engine lines, but if I may make this one exception, it'll be worth it. Let's bring up an analysis board as Hikaru contemplates how to continue this initiative. Rook c1 is what he's thinking about. And if the queen moves up to a5, look at this subtle move, a3. And you even say it quietly, a3. Preparing b4. Where's that queen going to go? Is it going to go back to b6, walking into one discovery? Is it going to go back to c7, walking into another? Black might have to play rook c8. You play b4, and now, Robert, you called it queen e3. Oh, that walks into a fork. No, it doesn't. Knight c6 check with queen a7 coming to a theater near you. The attack is decisive, and White's going to pick up the queen after that with bishop b6 check.
Well, I don't think Magnus wants to await that theatrical release. That looks horrible. That looks scary. And Hikaru, of course, is aiming for just this variation. He plays b4 right away. Wow. What a Hikaru move. He said, please take my pawn on b4. I'll play a3. And if you go queen a5 back, there's knight b3. Knight b3. And the queen might get trapped.
Knight d5. What an idea. This is amazing. He reverses the order of these two moves so that both of them occur with tempo. And the queen has to take the pawn. You have no choice. And maybe you have to go to c4. But, oh my God, Black is walking on some red-hot coals here.
You have to. Look at Hikaru's face. He's stunned. I think he's playing it up for the fans right now, but he truly is stunned that this is happening to Magnus Carlsen. And if queen c4, these knight d5 discoveries, you may be able to take on d5. If you're going to lose your queen, gobble up as much material as possible, right? So queen c4, knight d5, e takes d5. Rook takes on c4, you take back, you get a minor piece, a rook and a pawn, Lasker compensation for a queen.
And long castle, Robert, that epitomizes what has happened to Magnus in the 5-minute portion. That was such an uncharacteristic decision. Castling into the attack, depriving the queen of necessary escape squares. Magnus's judgment, his intuition, what he has hung his hat on for his entirety of his chess career. It's left him. It's disappointed him, to put it mildly, and Hikaru has exploited it for everything he's got. Now, does he play knight d5 and allow the Lasker compensation? Or do you play something like b3 and b4 and keep harassing the queen? Oh my God, Robert, there's a way to trap the queen.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. b3, then b4, and then move your knight away. Yes, it traps the queen. The reason why we're talking about this is if knight a2 right away, if White just plays that move, the queen is the a4 square to run to. So if the pawn were on b4, that looks like it's very weakening for the White king, but you actually block the queen from escaping. You win the queen for some material. And now Hikaru, who is down to 1 minute, 15 seconds, he needs to evaluate this correctly, Danya, because he doesn't have that much time. I know how good he is and how quick he is, but he does need to be a bit careful.
And he hasn't been in time pressure for like 4 games, really since the beginning of the match. So this might be Magnus's best hope. Just keep things as confusing as possible and hope that Hikaru panics in time pressure. But panic has not been in his vocabulary, whether he's at 3 minutes or 0.3 seconds.
No, but knight d5 feels like the most obvious move. It's just not the best move. And that would get Magnus a chance back in the game. So I feel like here, Hikaru, if he finds b3, that just shows the sensational form he's in, but he plays knight d5. I anticipated this would happen. And Danya, now I really feel like Magnus has a chance in this game. It's Lasker compensation for the queen.
Named after Emmanuel Lasker, the early world champion, Black has a lot of stuff. And after the bishop moves back to f8, he's got sustained pressure on the e4 pawn. Don't move the knight away from d4 because then the bishop is going to park itself on c6. Hikaru's got to be very careful. He has to be precise. He's still better, Robert, but this is encouraging for Magnus, and he is going to put his bishop on c6. And maybe
I think
bishop d8, bishop a5.
I was just going to say, practically speaking, soon Black may be better. It just, you have more material. The point value may be the same, but you have a bishop, a light square bishop, a rook, and a pawn for one queen, and you're just staring at this e4 pawn. He plays bishop d8. Good idea by you, played by Magnus. Bishop a5. Give me the knight on c3. Give me the pawn on e4. Look at Hikaru's clock.
And Hikaru says, give me the knight on f6. I have to relieve the pressure, but look at that mega rook on e5. Hikaru just says, I don't care about anything. I've got a queen, and I've got all of these weak pawns to capture. I still think Hikaru's going to win this game.
Wow, big move there by Hikaru, understanding to take the knight, take the pawn, get all those pawns off the board on the king side. And let's see, Magnus with 1 minute and 20 plus. He is up a full minute on the clock. What moves does he have? Queen takes f6 is the obvious threat. Then h4, h5, h6, h7, and finally h8. The pawn is just going to run up the board and make a new queen.
And he's going to run up the lead to 5 with a victory in this game. I think Magnus's only chance might be to use his rooks and actually try to checkmate the king in the corner. Try to put one rook on b6, the other rook on a5. It's slow. It's cumbersome. I think he's trying to do something like that but it's going off the rails. Hikaru just keeps munching on pawns.
Yeah, though, right now the rooks are defended, the bishop's defended. If queen takes f7, I think his bishop takes f5 is his idea. And the white king will be victim to a lot of checks. So that's the one bit of good news for black.
Oh, bishop g6, he blundered and Magnus missed it.
Magnus is playing too quickly. Bishop g6 was a discovered attack on the rook on e1, and the queen on f7 was hit as well.
Unbelievable blunder. Magnus is not even thinking about it because he's so used to losing games. I think inertia just carried him forward. Bishop g6, a discovered attack, and you couldn't take the bishop, not because you lost the rook, but because you got mated after that.
Okay, but look at that move. Rook b5.
Queen e7.
Rook b2, it's a draw. Rook d1.
He allows
a draw immediately.
And listen, a good practical call by Hikaru. No need to do anything crazy. The only winning move there was queen c7 to e7, but how hard is that to see with 2 seconds?
Oh, it's counterintuitive. You want to push your passed pawn or do something to shield your king. But the point is the king gets to run away here. The c2 square is covered. And Daniel, I think we should show that bishop g6 moment one more time. Magnus had plenty of time on his clock. He was playing for Hikaru's time trouble. It was a purely blitz decision. And Hikaru wouldn't have made his blunder if he had more time on his clock, but he did fall into this. Now, there's several big points. The queen is under attack. The rook on e1 is loose. You can't take on e5 with the rook, hoping, okay, the queen is off, but I get your rook. There's this check in between. So that's a very big check, I might add, because if instead of bishop takes f7, you take on d5, and then white's pawns run h4 and g4 and h5, and you push the h-pawn.
Here, white actually wins the game on the spot. So, one could say maybe Magnus saw this and missed rook d1. I don't think so because he spent about a second on his move. But bishop g6 would have won the game and turned I wouldn't say turned the match around. It would have still been a 3-point game, but a huge miss by Magnus.